Oh, yes. Are we live? I want to check on my phone here to make sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Omri Cope. I am the founder of Black Researchers United. It is a platform where we discuss research, and research. This is a very special day for us. Today is our third biannual Research Rumble. And particularly, this is the uh, introduction to our Rumble. Uh, I am going to introduce our uh, format, our um, details in just a moment. But first, we will cut to a short break. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our third biannual Research Rumble. I am your host, Omri Koch. I am the founder, once again, of Black Researchers United. As I mentioned before, we're all about research, okay? And I will say this too, no topic is off limits here. Our first biannual Research Rumble was during Black History Month, and it was, I believe it was 2 years ago. The subject was on the transatlantic slave trade. We had two sides to this discussion. On one side, we were discussing the participation of African people in the transatlantic slave trade. On the other side, we were talking about the resistance of African people against the transatlantic slave trade. That was a very, very interesting topic. Our guests for that discussion, we actually had 3 rounds, just like we're doing for this one. We spent the entire month. The 3 guests we had, the first one was Brother Adam Myrie, who is in Canada. Brother Myrie had some very great points. And then our second guest we had was Brother Abba. Brother Abba, he is in Jamaica currently, and he is actually a Maroon. He identifies as a Maroon, and he had a lot of great information, some perspective on that side in terms of the history of the transatlantic slave trade in the Caribbean. We also had as our final guest Brother Dwayne Wong Omowale, a Pan-African writer, who gave us another side of the discussion, which was primarily the political side. So I will say, just like we're doing today, that event was live streamed. The recording is available on our Facebook page. It is also available on our YouTube page, on our YouTube channel. So whenever you have a chance, feel free to go check it out. Our second biannual Research Rumble was on the subject of African religions. On one side, we were talking about the African spiritual belief systems in the continent, and on the other side, we were talking about the African spiritual belief systems in the diaspora. Scholars tend to refer to the former as African indigenous religions, and the latter as African-derived religions. That discussion was very deep, very, very deep. It was, in fact, transformational. So I would encourage you, viewers, if you have any questions, if you've ever been curious on learning about African religions, African spirituality, African belief systems, or even African culture, especially the pre-colonial frameworks that African people developed, I would certainly recommend just going and listening to this presentation. The guest that we had during that rumble was none other than Brother Asante. Brother Asante, at this moment, he's in South Africa, traveling, but he is actually from Canada. And so I will say he also is very well versed on the subject. He is someone who actually not just studies African spirituality, but practices it. So that is definitely a conversation that I'm sure our viewers here would find quite enlightening, as I did myself. So, today's discussion, we are talking about feminism and womanism. This is a topic that is is so foundational, I believe. The topic of gender, the topic of human socialization, and yet is a topic that we don't really address in our Afrocentric circles. It's something that we tend to gloss over. And I think that is something that we need to really address. We need to really confront these this mindset of hesitation. We need to really start to get into this topic, because the more that I read about this, the more that I started to realize the importance, the significance that it has in this day and age. When we talk about what is the future of the African people, where are we going? You know, where are we heading, and where are we hoping to be? This question cannot be ignored by rather, this question cannot be properly answered, I should say, by ignoring a subject such as women's rights, or such as gender in a pre-colonial Africa. And those are subjects that we are going to be addressing. I can happily guarantee that this Rumble will be one like no other. It will be a discussion in which we are not here to simply, you know, just be friendly and just, you know, have a little pleasant conversation over some tea. No, we are here to talk and to find out what is the truth. We want to know. Now, for those who are watching, I will say this. We have extended the invitation for anyone who has some knowledge on this subject, or anyone who is interested in doing their own research and presenting that research, to join us. Join us on this discussion. If you're watching and you're asking yourself, you know, how do I join? Maybe you had no idea that we were going to do this. It's very simple. If you're on Facebook, right now this is streaming to Facebook. If you're watching, you just need to go to our event page. I'm going to post the link in the comment section. And on that page, you will see the Zoom link. Just go ahead and click on that, and I will go ahead and let you right in, and you know, we'll have our discussion. You can always feel free to just watch, just listen. If you have any questions, you can drop them in the chat, and we will do our best to answer those questions. So, let me just go ahead and introduce one of our participants here. We have a gentleman here on the Zoom. His name is Brother Corey. Now, I've been in conversations with Brother Corey for quite some time. He is a very avid researcher. He is also a very avid lecturer. He is an educator, so he is someone who has a lot of knowledge. He has read a lot of books. And I am so excited to have Brother Corey with us. We had two other guests who volunteered to join and to, you know, present here some of their knowledge. Two women who were supposed to be here, but unfortunately, one of them said they were not able to make it. The other one, I was not able to get any updates on her. So we're just going to kind of play it by ear, and if they are able to join us over the course of this conversation, then we are more than welcome to have them. So without further ado, Brother Corey, you can go go ahead there and introduce yourself.
Hello, good evening, everyone. As anyone listening, yeah, very interesting discussion. Always a very contentious one, particularly in my country of Trinidad and Tobago. There's a lot. I have my own views on it, particularly in the fundamental sense of the term. I have an issue with the concept of feminism, given its deeply racist, deeply colonialist history. Its extreme ties to essentially a white middle class Euro-American and European foundation, as opposed to what has been the reality in many countries in the British and French Caribbean, as well as in Africa, where there were deferrals to women's authority without it ever being given a name. So I understand the scholars who took issue with the concept of feminism and broke away from it and coined what today we call womanism. So that's my take on it to start the conversation.
All right, awesome. So Brother Corey, if you mind me asking, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your background, your interests, some of the things that led you on this path to research, and maybe even some of the things that led you to an understanding or a pursuit of understanding on the subject that we're discussing here.
Interestingly enough, I kind of could say I accidentally fell into this level of the research. That was never my intention. I was actually looking, simply looking into the question of the origins of calypso, which is the folk music that my country is famous for. I was simply looking to the origins of calypso, as well as following up something my teacher had told me when I was in my first year of secondary school in Form 1 when I was in St. Benedict's College, which was that Africans came to the Americas before Columbus. So 5 years after I graduated after Form 5, I wandered into a library, done this and came across Ransom Tima's books. And that was 1988, I believe it was, somewhere around that. And it basically began from that point on. But along the way, I've come to realize that a lot of the history, particularly in the British Caribbean, which our political history is very much wrapped in the labor movement. During that research, I realized that a lot of the history, the social history of the Caribbean, as well as the Western Hemisphere in general, as I began to widen my search, I realized that a lot of that history is tied in to the advancement of women, and that women were at the forefront of a lot of the radical activism that took place in the Caribbean and the wider Western Hemisphere. And yet it seems to be I wouldn't say totally unrecognized, but it was a distant second to some of the major male labor figures,
right,
and
right.
Social activists. So as I began to dig, I realized that it goes even further back into Africa itself, and that there was a lot of what I call, I don't like to use the term matriarch. I have major problems with the term matriarchal, particularly since many people misinterpret it to mean a feminine version of patriarchy. I tend to use I use the term matriaxial. Particularly after I came across the books of people like Ife Amadiome and Professor Oyeronke Oyewumi, both from Nigeria, as well as Shekanta Diop. So coming across that body of research, I realized that there's a very, very strong undercurrent, even in the diaspora, of, feminine-centered authority and deference that has always been eroded and come under constant attack by the colonial experience, by neoliberalism, and yet it still manages to show itself every now and then. And it's not necessarily, even though it may intersect, or it may connect, dovetail in many respects with what people call feminism. Even in the university, the gender studies department talk a lot about feminism, and yet there is that element that is very much separate and apart from the feminism that basically dominates the narrative. Because I recognize that feminism itself is a problematic term even within the Western community. There are different feminisms as opposed to the white middle class.
Oh yeah.
And I think it's very important that we understand that there are nuances, and yet even in those nuances, there are still fundamentals that separate that from what exists in many Caribbean, French and English speaking, some Spanish speaking as well, but I haven't done a whole lot of research into the Spanish side, but more so the French and more so the British, as well as what existed in Africa prior to the onslaught of colonialism and neocolonialism.
Wow, Brother Corey, it sounds like quite a journey.
This year has been a very, and I'm currently working on a book, in fact, that I've been researching for several years, looking at the impact, mostly negative, but the impact of European social values through Christianity on the feminine, as feminine concepts of African concepts of femininity in post-independence Trinidad, which is where I live.
Wow. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Brother Corey, it is good to have you. Good to have you join us on this discussion. Now we have two sisters who joined us here.
Yes, I invited them.
Oh yeah, awesome. That is great. I'm so happy to hear that. I just heard Sister Denisa a second there. Sister Denisa, how are you doing? Hi.
I'm great. I was sleeping, but I'm here.
Well,
how are you?
Sometimes we all need a little wake up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, it is so good to have you, Sister Denisa. We have one other person here.
Isabel.
Yeah, Isabel.
Okay. Hi, Isabel.
Yes.
Hey, how are you doing?
And I have another friend who's coming in shortly. So a lot of Trinidadians in the house tonight.
Hey, I love it. All right, so I will just quickly say this. We're using the free trial of Zoom here, so it's going to cut us off in about a minute.
Okay.
And then it's basically going to keep us from joining back in for about 10 minutes. I know it's crazy. And then we're going to get to join back in. So what we're going to do is we're going to let it just let the time run out. I'm going to take a break. So the people that are watching the live stream, they're just going to see, just kind of a blank screen. They're going to hear some music. And then we're going to jump right back in. Okay? You're going to use the same link. And then I'm going to just go ahead and, let everybody back in the room, and we'll pick up from there. Okay? All right. So for those who are listening, stay tuned. We will be right back. cut off. All right. All right. We will be right back, everyone.
Hi, and welcome to our first biannual Research Rumble.
Recording in progress.
Hello, hello. All right, for those of you who are watching on our live stream, we are going to be starting again shortly. Stay tuned, continue to stay tuned. We will be right back. Testing, testing. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our third biannual Research Rumble. I am your host, Omri Koch. I am the founder of Black Researchers United. It is a platform where we talk about research. We talk about different topics, all kinds of topics, nothing off limits. Today, we are talking about the subject of feminism and womanism. We are talking about women's rights. We're talking about African history. Now, this third Research Rumble, as I mentioned before, we have three main questions. Today, we are just doing a general discussion about what we believe. What do we believe about feminism? What do we believe about womanism? What do these concepts mean to us? I also want us to talk and to think about what is womanhood? What does it mean to be a woman in this day and age? What does it mean to you? For those of you who are watching, you can always drop a comment, and if you have a question, you can always do that as well, and we will address this as we go along. So we had a few people who just joined us on the Zoom here. Once again, we are streaming this live to our Facebook page, Black Researchers United, and this will also be restreamed to our YouTube channel of the same name. So if you didn't get a chance to join us live, you can always go back and rewatch this stream to see what you missed. Now, we already introduced Brother Corey. We also introduced Sister Denise, or Denisa, who she will be back, I'm sure. But there's a few new names here that you might not be familiar with. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. But before we do that, I want to quickly reintroduce myself. So I will start with me. My name is Omri. I am a native of South Florida. I was born and raised here. My background is Caribbean, particularly the island of Jamaica. That's where my family hails from. I am an avid reader. I research. I like to listen and to learn about subjects pertaining to African history, African culture, African people. Particularly in this subject we're talking about here, I have a number of books that I have enjoyed quite thoroughly. I'd like to share with you some of them for those of you who are watching, wondering, how can I learn more? How can I educate myself about, feminism, about womanism, about the history of how these concepts were developed, and even to learn about some of the, the great thinkers who were able to develop the foundations of these ideas. So I'm going to start here with this book, African Woman and Feminism, Reflecting on the Politics of Sisterhood by Oyeronke Oyewumi. I must apologize in advance if I am not getting these pronunciations correct. I will try my best. There's a next book here, A Kick in the Belly by Stella Dadzi, Women, Slavery, and Resistance. It's a book that Brother Corey introduced me to. I have a few other books that are relevant to Black women throughout history. And I'm looking for one book in particular. I will get back to it. There's a book here. This book is by Angela Davis, Woman, Race, and Class. I actually invited Angela Davis to this discussion, but she was not able to make it, unfortunately. There's another book here, Against White Feminism, Notes on Disruption. The book is by Rafia Zakaria. Another book here, Black Feminism Reimagined by Jennifer C. Nash. Here's another book by Mimi Salami. It's called A Black Feminist Approach for Everyone. I invited this author to our discussion as well. I thought she had some very great ideas, and I would definitely recommend reading her book to get a little bit of what she has to say. Some of you might be familiar with this author, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. This is an excellent starter if you're interested in, what is African feminism. The book is called We Should All Be Feminists, and there's a TED Talk where she basically explains her perspective as a Nigerian. Just, having firsthand experience about in pertaining to the gender dynamics in her country. I have another book here that she wrote, Dear Ijiwele, or A Feminist Manifesto. Very good book, I think, that deserves some attention. Another book.
Sorry to interrupt. I'll be very curious as to hear what Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie said regarding we should all be feminists, because I'd like to hear. I haven't read her book.
Okay.
And I'd like to hear her perspective, particularly since I have three other Nigerian academics who would take the slightly different view, depending on the perspective I think she's coming from. So I'd really like to hear during the course of your discussion, particularly to hear what she has to say.
Yes, absolutely. We're actually going to use her talk, We Should All Be Feminists, as a jump-off point on one of our questions a little further in. And at that point, I'm going to actually, I'm going to try and see if I can play the video so that our viewers can hear a little snippet. So I'm glad you mentioned that, Brother Corey. That is a very, very, very timely question there. So now, this book, the next one here, Womanism and African Consciousness. I must admit, I have not read this book yet. By Mary E. Modupe Kolowole. This is probably the only book I've not read yet, but I still do recommend this book. I will get this read by the end of this week. I promise you that. Well, I'll return to this book. Here's a book here, African Feminism, The Politics of Survival in Sub-Saharan Africa. Like most of these books I'm introducing, this is an entire volume. This one is edited by Gwendolyn Mikell. Seeking the Beloved Community, a Feminist Race Reader by Joy James. I invited her to our discussion, but unfortunately she wasn't able to make it. Women and Sustainable Development, Empowering Women in Africa. Another volume, Mary Conte and Ayasha Tirivati. Those are some great authors. I'm going to return to this book as well. In this book, we turn to Europe. To Exist is to Resist, Black Feminism in Europe. This book is by Emejulu and Sobande. Patriarchy and Gender in Africa. Another excellent book. I read this one edited by Monica Finbury. Sorry, Veronica. I said Monica, I meant Veronica. The name was cut off there in the front. Katie's Canon. This is the final book. Katie's Canon by Katie Geneva Cannon. All right. Okay, so fellow participants, you can go ahead and introduce yourselves. Who would like to go first? Just gotta tell us who you are, what got you interested in this topic, and maybe give us a few references that you would suggest for us.
Good evening, can you hear me?
Yes. Is that Brother Terrence? Okay, I think you just muted again.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
All right, wonderful. Hi, good evening. I go by the name Gamma Ghost. I am not a researcher as such. I am actually a speaker, spoken word poet from Trinidad. Yes, Gamma. All right, from Trinidad and Tobago. But so I'm here on the invitation of Mr. Jokes. He's a man who's an authority on these matters. I trust thoroughly, and I know if he recommends a particular line of discussion for me, I'm very likely to be here. So I'm no authority on the subject matter at all, but I'm someone who's curious about life, and I'm always open to hearing new insights about, particularly about topics that are current and hotly debated. So I'm very intrigued about tonight's discussion, and forgive me if you don't hear from me a lot. I seem to be having some connectivity problems as well, but I'm here as best as I can be. All right, so that's who I am.
And the fellow said down provocative, that's why I invited you too.
Thank you.
Well, we're glad to have you, Brother Gamma. Okay, who will be next?
Yeah, I'm Brother Terrence. Good night, Omri, Corey.
Good night.
Great to be on. Corey sent me the link. So I normally communicate with him on 2 chats. So we have a lot of information sharing. That's what I do a lot of these days. I have my days in lecturing on Black history and so on. And as Corey said, I tend to take a lot from Charles Finch and Dr. Issa Hilliard and those guys, Dr. Ben and so on. I met a few of them, Dr. Ben and Vance Jima. I met a few of the guys and sat with them.
Okay. So
I've been able to get, a grounding in so far, right? This discussion kind of shook me a little bit when it mentioned the introduction mentioned womanism, which is a term that I have recently started to hear a lot about. So I am definitely interested in hearing the views and so on. So hope you have a successful night tonight.
All right. I hope so too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Okay, who will be next?
All right. Good night, everybody. My name is Madonna. I am a locksmith by profession, a female who is in a profession that is a predominantly male job, I would say. And based on the discussion, I would say that I got into the field before I would even say I would understand what the meaning of womanism and feminism was. And being in the field and struggling to get the respect of even colleagues in the profession and customers alike, both male and female, it was something, I would say feminism is something that I would have come into over the years, struggled to come into, forced to come into, and then became an advocate for. Being in the field and seeing the struggle and understanding the struggle that women have to go through day to day after having experienced my own. Sometimes we have to be tossed into the fight to understand what the fight is. So I hope tonight brings a new awareness for many. And I am in total support of the statement where we all need to be feminists, because it will bring about a total change in the society that we have. And it would be one of the necessary tools to change the thinking of many who seem to be teaching others the old, I dare want to say the old school way, but the old school way bringing forward that old way of thinking where a woman's place is in the kitchen, or it's like it's so many things coming to my mind now that are trying to choose which one to throw out.
Right.
But and we all know that saying that when they say a woman's place is in the kitchen or barefoot and pregnant and so on. But I am also a court officer, and one of my experiences at my job was somebody saying to me why I didn't get up 3 o'clock this morning and cook like his wife. I wouldn't say what I told him, but we really need to work on changing the mindset of not just the males, but our entire culture. It's not limited to males, because we have females that, and sometimes you look at it and you say, just like how we say our black people, our people, we are the ones keeping our own selves down. The same way I could say our women on the whole. We're not looking at race, we're not looking at age, we're not looking at what region of the world they're from. Women on the whole, we also keep each other down. So yes, we all have to become feminists, because nothing will change until we all see where this is going to take us, how it's going to make a big change, and how many of the things are going to be taken back to the youth, and how it's going to change everything that looks forward after that. And that's my input.
Wow. Thank you so much, Sister Madonna, for sharing that with us. I love it. Thank you for that brilliant introduction. And it looks like you're already getting the ball rolling on our discussion. I was excited. I was already yeah. You got some interesting points in there. Sister Portia, did you want to go ahead and introduce yourself next?
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Portia Roberts. I am a PhD student at the University of West Indies. It's through Corey I knew about this. As a matter of fact, I saw a text. I was outside and I came inside, and Corey sent this message to me that, there's something going on Zoom. Come on now. And I'm paraphrasing when I said, all right, no problem. I'm all for listening and learning, being a student, that is. So as I'm on, I'm like, oh, okay. Oh, so that's the topic. Woman versus feminism. Oh, okay, cool. Now, I'm going to be honest, in terms of that, womanism is a term I just learned about a few seconds ago. Feminism, yes. Womanism, no. And you asked a vital question, and it's a question I keep asking myself. And I think it's a question that each woman will ask herself, unless she's really, truly in touch with herself. What is it to be a woman? Because it will differ from person to person, ethnicity, religion, culture, country. It differs for each person, right? Womanism and feminism. For me, feminism is the empowering of women. And I was listening to Madonna's story just now, and the profession she's in, and it is male dominated. My research is on women in the trade union movement and the challenges that would arise for their ascent to leadership. And I question why there are not enough women taking up leadership positions in the trade union movement. Is it still a patriarchal system, or do patriarchal systems debar women from taking up leadership positions? I don't think so. But there are challenges, and I'd like those to be exposed. And if that makes me a feminist, I have no problem with that, because to me, I see my research as empowering women, or empowering females to, get into leadership where this male-dominated institution is concerned. When you say feminism to people, especially now, and you mention gender, there's a lot of pushback. And I believe that pushback is because, people don't fully understand what it is about.
Right.
And I have also told my lecturers that what I'm learning, unfortunately, it is not disseminated to schools in a proper way. And when you hear this talk about feminism now, there's a whole lot of topics encapsulated into that, and so you're going to get a pushback from people because it's not being fully disseminated and understood as it should.
True.
And
I don't mean to cut you off, but we are using the free version of Zoom, so it's going to cut us off shortly. So I just wanted to say that if it happens, just use the same link to join right back in the meeting. It gives us a 10-minute buffer time. Okay, and then we got cut off. So stay tuned, folks. For those of you who are watching, stay tuned. We will be right back shortly. We are just going to go ahead and boot the Zoom back up, and our participants will rejoin. So for those of you who are watching, what have you gathered so far? Did you have any questions? Feel free to leave some questions in the comments, and we will get right back to it.
Recording in progress.
All right. Okay. It looks like we're back. I thought it wouldn't let us in for a little while, but it looks like somebody was correct. We are back. We're gonna just give a minute or two for everybody else to join back in. Looks like we're still waiting on Brother Corey. Who else? Sister Denisa. Yeah, there was quite a few, so we're just gonna give them a little time. But I think Sister Portia was in the middle of introducing herself, so we're gonna just go ahead and let her continue. And then I think the last person to introduce themselves would be Sister Isabella, but she's not here yet. So when she gets back in, we'll give her the opportunity to do so. Go ahead, Sister Portia.
Yeah, right. So, when Madonna was talking, I could have empathized with her because being, in a male-dominated organization for years was not easy. And then, there were other complications that came with it. And so, based on my experiences and, looking at things through a female eye, I decided to embark upon this research, about women and leadership in the trade union movement. Some of the books that you displayed earlier, I have them as well, the Angela Davis and the Chimamanda. I have some of those. Some of those I did not know about. I don't know if you have this one on Claudia Jones, Beyond Containment. That's a great one. Yes.
I need
yes.
I need that.
Yes, yes Corey, Corey, who has his hair, at least he's the one who, he was the one who, and a young lady called Nicole Hendrickson, who told me about Claudia Jones as well as my lecturer. So Beyond Containment, try and see if you can get that. And Left of Karl Marx, I believe. Yes.
I've heard of that one. I need that one too.
Right. Yeah. So for me, feminism is addressing also those gaps and silences where women are concerned. Their histories, the story that they make. Because in a lot of societies and in a lot of organizations, the women are there beside the men doing the work, but you don't hear their stories. And so besides, I consider myself a feminist historian. I am addressing gaps and silences and exposing them. And with that exposition is to empower women to be all they can be, to push against those barriers that would seem to withhold you and, push past them and to be all that you can be. And, Madonna was saying that women, we are almost enemy. But you have to remember that the upholders of patriarchy, they live what you know. It is what it is. So if we as women come up in a society, and this is how we know women are supposed to be or females are supposed to be, right? When we are confronted with anything else, as with a lot of things, is one or two things. Is either you confront the change, you accept the change, or you push back against it, or if you really want it to remain, you get violent about it. So for a lot of women, if that is what they know and they are comfortable in it, they've seemed to survive in it, they don't want that change. So you will get these kinds of, you'll get that kind of talk, you'll get that kind of philosophy from them because it is what it is and they live what they know. But if you're a woman who understands or a female who understands that there's more out there for you, right, you fight against it and you encourage the change and you empower others to change as well. And it's not only women, it's men and women. We are all in this together. If the men do not accept that change is coming and there's more to us than meets the eye, you're going to get resistance. You're going to get problems. So it's not that we're also empowering women to be feminists or equality, but to understand that if we as women are not comfortable or if we are being stifled, the society is not going to progress. It's not going to go where it's supposed to go. And, I don't want to take up anyone else's time, but I'll hold for now. Thanks.
Wow. Mr. Portia, that was, quite insightful. I definitely appreciate, especially sharing some of those resources you mentioned. I've been reading about Claudia Jones, and for some reason, it never crossed my mind. I need to get one of her books. So now I'm definitely going to put that on my list. So we have Sister Isabella. I think she's the last one to introduce herself. We don't yet see Sister Denisa in here, but hopefully she'll be back and she will introduce herself as well.
Hi, I'm Isabel, and I was invited by Corey to jump on. I'm not in... It's subjects of womanism and feminism doesn't quite interest me. And I'll tell you why. There's a way that people hide behind words, and I'm more interested in actions. And so I understand there needs to be a philosophy behind your actions, and I understand every action has a philosophy behind it. But I've found in the recent past that a lot of times people get into a debate about semantics, into a debate about what does this mean and why should it this and why should it that. And what I've found is when charting new territory and exploring new things, it's really, you don't know until you do it. You don't know if it's going to work until you do it. And hypothesizing on your armchair or by a computer, by a phone is something that I've stopped doing as much because I feel like until you actually get out there and start like putting it into practice, until you start like creating organizations, or in every organization you are part of, like ensuring that that is part of the ethos, that is part of the philosophy, interrupting when things are happening. If you're not actioning some of the philosophy, any of the philosophy in everyday life, real and everyday life, then the debate to me isn't even of any value. And so that's I sometimes listen to conversations because I'm just like, oh well, what are people saying now? But for me, it's really more about what are people doing. And I've heard a lot of people. I've been in spaces where people have been like, yeah, we're about this, we're about that, we're about the other, and then something happens, very small, very sort of like not high risk. No one's going to lose their job. No one's going to like. Nothing is going to really happen if they interrupt the pattern, but they see the pattern that's against what they say that they're for, and they do nothing. But if you talk to them, they have all the right words, they have all the right statements, they have all the right definitions, they have all the right answers to every part of the debate. But when it comes time to action in a small, inconsequential, low-risk everyday situation, they're quiet. They don't say anything. They have no talk. And for me, that just kind of, I'm like, a lot of people I've seen that have a lot of, like, what do you call it? Bark, but no bites. I'm about the biting. Like, let me bite, let me wrangle, let me deal with it. And then once we finish, then we can sit back and analyze what it is we did, what worked and what didn't work, and then set up a roadmap for other people so that they don't have to go through the fights as well. But for me, like starting at a place where we're all just like debating a lot of things, I mean, it has its place, but I also think that a lot of times people get stuck in that space and stuck in the definitions and the, debates. And I'm just like, yeah, while we're debating, men are killing women don't have places to stay, women are being treated like Madonnas, like every other woman in this space. There are issues that men can't change diapers and they have no changing rooms for men. Men cannot cry. Like, there are like lots of things are happening at the same time we're debating. And for me, it's just like, how do we start shifting the movement, shifting the action, doing things every day, every moment, every time to be able to make it come to life. So that's my position. I'll listen.
Wow. You really said something there, Sister Isabella. I definitely appreciate you sharing that perspective. I agree. I feel like we do tend to get stuck in that kind of mindset. It reminds me of something that Sister Joy James, who wrote this book, Seeking the Beloved Community, it reminds me of something that she said in one of her talks, which was essentially that academia, it tends to be a space that is used to discuss radical ideas. However, that is a very limiting space. Some people get this, I don't know how it comes about, but they feel like it takes a certain kind of person to act, on their beliefs. They look for a scholar who's going to, deliver us, or they look for, someone from a particular caste or upbringing, someone who has a certain voice that moves people to do things. We're waiting on like another Garvey or another Malcolm, and as a matter of fact, we tend to not even think about some of the women who led us in the past even. And then to think about the fact that we still have leaders with us today. When I was watching Sister Chimamanda Adichie, in her talk, let's all be feminists, or we should all be feminists, rather. It's another thing that she brought out. She said that in the past, leadership was all about who's going to be the strongest, who's going to have the most power and who is the most forceful. There's a lot of aggression behind this idea of leadership. But she said that's not what it's about today. In this day and age, especially, it's not the strongest person who is the most qualified for leadership. And she was saying this addressing the role of women in the present day society. The fact that men and women, they are just as equal equal in the potential and the capacity for intelligence. And today it's really the most intelligent that tends to be the most qualified for leadership. The person that has the ability to understand, to really interpret and to act on the knowledge that they're able to find. Okay, Sister Isabella, you had another point. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, it depends on what you mean by leadership, and it depends on what you mean by strength, because it takes strength to be vulnerable, right? It takes strength to show your underbelly, and it takes strength to manage households and work. It takes strength to support men in ways that they don't even realize. It takes different kinds of strength. And so when we're talking about strength and only thinking about it in one way, then we kind of have to start questioning ourselves, how are we limiting our definition of strength, and what does that mean, right? Because it takes strength to grow a whole human. It takes strength to menstruate every month. It takes strength. My mother's forever saying, if men had their periods, then men would have period parties, and they would be 1 week off every month. There would be 1 week off because everybody get paid off time, because men need to have their periods in peace, and they would have period meetups and stuff, and so it said that, and I thought, no, it's really true, but it takes strength to do it takes strength for your body to physically be however it is, and different women have it in different ways, but feeling that way and still functioning at full capacity, it takes strength. And so when we're talking about leadership and when we're excluding all those other types of strengths, then we're sort of limiting the possibilities of what could and what could happen. And then when we think about Marcus Garvey had two Amy's behind him. When you look at every man, I'm actually watching it in real life right now. Someone that I know is really doing some amazing work, and his wife is making sure that his legacy is being held together. I'm watching it in real life. She is behind him, telling him, hey, guess what, do this, hey, do this, and on his case. He is not even thinking about it, and she's on his case. And then finally he comes to realize that what she's saying makes sense, and then he does it, and then it's whoa, he's amazing. And nobody ever goes back and says, well, no, it was actually her idea. She was the one who told me to do it. And so I'm seeing this in real life. And then when I started to explore the men that did amazing things in the world, the black men that did amazing things in the world, you realize that every one of them had a set of women around them. A set of women. Women are the organizers. Women are the ones who drive the men, do the work so that the men can be in front. And even Denicia David, who was just on the call, I was having a conversation with her this last week, within the last 7 days, and I was telling her, you need to be, she's in the behind the scenes of TEDx Porter Spain. And I'm like, you need to be in front on the stage. You haven't been on the stage. She's like, no. I'm like, well, you need to be on the stage. She's like, really? But I'm like, no, you need to be on the stage. The kind of work you're doing, it's amazing. You need to tell your story, not to big yourself up and puff up your chest, but so that other people can know about it and can learn from it. It'll help others. And she's like, yes. Well, I guess. But even that, she's been in the background of TEDx for the longest while, and she has not been brought to the front. And so there are things like that. Like, that's why I'm like, what are we doing? What are we doing? Like, really just doing things because I'm seeing this, I'm seeing the disservice. I'm seeing this, how we limit what we're talking about or how we put boxes on it. And then it's just like,
yeah, that I love what you said there. As you were talking about the fact that women have demonstrated their strength, by literally physically, right? Physically and physiologically being able to deliver, every human being that's ever come into existence into this world, that in itself is proof of strength. I would also like to acknowledge the fact that women have not just served the nurturing role, or has been in that role, rather, but women have also provided the role of counsel. We tend to think of men as the intellectuals, but women, women are teachers. Women have as mothers are teachers, right? And so they help to instill in children a sense of identity. When you mentioned, Sister Isabella, about Garvey, recently, I think it was earlier this year, I did an article on Black woman nationalists. We always hear about the men, but I wrote about Amy Jacques Garvey and Amy Ashwood Garvey, and the ways that they shaped the Garvey movement. So I love that you brought that up. I really think that that's impactful. That's something for us to really think about and to change our perspective on leadership. So I'm going to just open the floor. I want to get an idea about what are our thoughts in terms of, womanhood. What is womanhood? Especially when we think about in this day and age, there tends to be some confusion at times where some people think, well, there's not really any, maybe I can't say what the majority opinion is, but I can say I have heard some people say that, well, there is no particular way to be a woman, and some people have said, well, there is no particular definition or way to define womanhood. So I'm just gonna kind of open the floor just to get some ideas on, what does it mean to you to be a woman? What does it mean in this day and age? Has that definition changed over time? What do you think? What are your thoughts? Maybe even to add to that, is there a difference with being an African woman? How does that change the experience of being a woman? I just want to get some thoughts. What are some ideas, or what maybe some of the things that you've heard, or some of the things that you've even questioned? And for those who are watching on the live stream, you can always drop your questions as well.
Breaking up. Check your audio.
Oh, okay. Are you hearing me? Okay. Are you hearing me now?
Yeah, you're perfectly now.
Oh, okay. Oh, I'm sorry. So maybe you didn't hear what I had said before. Okay, yeah. So the question was, what does it mean to be a woman? What is womanhood to you? And when it comes to African womanhood or Black womanhood, how does that change the experience of being a woman? Also, how has the definition of womanhood or the experience changed over time? And how do you feel about that? That's the question.
All right, I will, I will start the ball rolling. I have to step away for a second while I'm watching until they come. But for me, as I said earlier on, right, womanhood, it varies from person to person, color, class, religion, all has a part to play with it. And as old as I am, I still ask myself that question, what it is to be a woman, because, society has it that, to be a woman, you have to be genteel, respectful, quiet, dress a certain way, talk a certain way. And, and for me, sometimes, you're not fully a woman. The way how society has it is that you're not fully a woman if you're married and have children. And I've experienced that in my life, whereby because of how I dressed, I love pants and my hair is cut short. I was called a lesbian because because of the way how I looked, I was dressed. I'm over a certain age and I'm not married. So for some people, that is how as a woman, when you're just a certain age, you're supposed to be married and have children. Otherwise, something wrong with you, or you're a lesbian. Right? Not that I have a problem with being called a lesbian, but it's just the perception and how society, would view you as a woman at a certain age. This is supposed to happen, that's supposed to happen, right? So for all my education and achievements in the academic field and career-wise, that took second place to not having a family, to not having children. But sometimes for a woman, could be quite daunting and debilitating because, is that all there is to be? Is that all there is to me? Being a woman and being a Black woman too, it's a bit, it's also could be a task, especially when you have your own, from your Black men saying, well, something wrong with you, or you're difficult, or the men saying, well, something wrong with you because like you can't get a man. Or sometimes they say, well, apparently a man will solve your problem. She need a man. Believe me, they say that, right? But that is how society, and the socialization process have us. And the thing is that, now where you look at our education system, whereby they're saying that women or girls are outperforming the boys. But yet still, although women are outperforming the boys, and in the universities, more women are graduating than men, if you still look across the boardrooms in corporate Trinidad and Tobago, a lot of men are still in charge. So what does that say about womanhood and education and feminism, etc.? And, this would not change overnight. And it's something that Madonna said, and something that I said, that for all these spaces that we talk about these issues, right, where is it going? Is it being disseminated down? Is it going to the ground? And for this to change, it has to go to the ground, right? The perception and the talk that will be generated, it has to go to the ground. It has to get into the schools for that change to happen. It has to get into religion. Believe me, religion is a big factor, whether we like to realize that or not. Religion is a big factor into how we perceive ourselves and how we carry ourselves as women. That is also a very big factor that has to be tackled. But of course, that will not happen overnight. But, and it's as Madonna said, when these things happen, you hear the talk, but who is going to instigate the change? How is it going to happen? Right? How is it going to happen? Where are we going to start where these perceptions are concerned? Right? Because it passes on from generation to generation. When is it going to change? How are we going to change it? And sometimes when I have, lectures and I talk to female officers, sometimes they say they get tired, always having to fight to be heard. When they're in certain spaces, it can get tiring. And I said, yes, I understand that because I've been there, done that. But struggle, especially when you want to have changes, it has to be a revolution. And when you have a revolution, you can't sit down on your desk for change to come. You have to be vocal about it. And Madonna was right. You have to be vocal. But who's going to be vocal? Who is going to instigate that change to bring about? For me, it's through my research. And I was telling, as I told my lecturers, that for all the work that we're doing on feminism and all the work that we're doing where change is concerned, it will not happen if we don't go out there and talk to people. It will not happen if it does not get into the syllabuses syllabus in schools. It will not change. It will continue. But it could happen. But it's how fast it will happen. That's the question. And that's just my 2 cents. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's the question. It's how fast. I think that goes back to what Sister Isabella was saying about the talk versus the action. Talk tends to be prolonged, but action is more immediate. It's more like, it's in the here and now. It's what's happening. So I love that, Sister Portia. Excellent point. Did we have any other responses to the question? Again, the question is, what is womanhood to you? What does it mean to be a woman? And how do you feel that this understanding has changed over time? What are your thoughts?
I would say that the root of womanhood has not. One aspect of it is it really hasn't changed over time, where we the mother, the aunt, the sister, the motivator, the teacher. But when we look at it from the family perspective, but there's another side where it's a woman of the 80s, a woman of the 90s, a woman of, it depends on what era you come from and how much influence the era has on the woman. Mm-hmm. And I think it all goes right back to what I was saying with the youth, because how do we call it, the millennials? The millennials now, mm-hmm. I don't think they have a clue what that question means. They don't have a true sense of who they are, and let's say the females don't really understand what it is to be a woman because they're too wrapped up in technology and TikToking, and for them, I would say, a woman would be TikToking every day and tweeting every day. Well, I think we had to say Xing now, Xing every day, But the true essence of it is being the person who builds or sets the roots for whatever comes out of the home. And sometimes we can't just say, okay, I have children, but the neighbor may not have children, but the neighbors as a woman may influence your children and all the children on the street. Remember when we were young and you do something on the way home? We always want to know, how on earth, mommy, no, I do this before I reach home, and you get 2 taps. I think to this day, I still don't understand how they did that. I do understand the whole eyes behind the head thing as a mother, but that how they knew whatever it has happened before we get home, because we all know, telephones. There was no cell phone in that era, and there was not telephones in every home. Excuse me, but I want to stick with the point that not necessarily, I'm not saying what it is for me, but I feel like the millennials are quite lost in that regard.
Okay. That is actually an interesting point there. I when I think about it, just to kind of piggyback on that, some people say, why does it matter? They say, for example, why do we need to define what it means to be a woman? Why is that necessary? Some people might see it as sort of a limiter to place a, kind of box in this idea, this definition, this term or this label. So I think it's important, as you said, Sister Madonna, to really consider, this question and the significance that it has for the younger generation.
Yeah, because okay, for me as a mother, there'd be certain lessons that I would try to teach my daughters, and they may not understand, okay, why is mommy trying to plant these seeds or whatnot? But I do it because I want them, when they, blossom into womanhood, to understand who they are, how powerful they are, how powerful their influence is. For them to understand that they too will then have the power to influence another generation. It's like, look, I dare say use this example. It's like cow poop. We pass it on the farm, and we never know how valuable it's going to be until it's dried and mixed with soil and whatnot, and then we have to pay 10 times the price as when we could have just pick it up there. So it may look, the information may sound and look good less at the time, but then when they get older, they look back and, oh, my mother used to tell me X, Y, Z. Some youth get it when they're young. Some do. And they tend to be the ones that get a head start on everything. And some of them have to go through certain experiences and, before they start to get it. And then there are some that never get it.
Yeah, that's true. I feel like a lot of the learning comes through experience. And so even like in terms of some of the authors I've read, they talk about specific experiences that they had that were negative, as a woman. I was listening to Sister Adichie's talk, We Should All Be Feminists. And she talks about how, as a woman in Nigeria, there are things that her male friends did not perceive as oppression, but she could clearly identify them. One of the examples she gave was where she went to the market, and it was her, I believe she was the one that drove to the market, and her male friend was in the passenger seat. And she paid the person who was attending to the groceries, the one who was packing them in the trunk, or it was the parking attendant. But this person, when they accepted the money from her, turned to her male friend and said, "Thank you, sir," and didn't even acknowledge her, as if he's the one that made that money. But it was her who put her her sweat into it. So, she identified a number of other very subtle things in her society, in her world, which a man is not able to see as an issue. So we have to be very cognizant of the fact that, again, like you said, Sister Madonna, experience really helps with this understanding, with this consciousness of our reality, the way that we understand the struggles of women, especially Black women, African women, compared to other people. I even think about, as you were speaking, I am reminded of, you were talking about the cow dung story there. It brought to mind the fact that in Africa, in the continent, women actually are the primary producers. They're the ones who really generate the agricultural production of Africa on a large scale. They're the ones doing the farming, doing the planting, the harvesting, bringing things to market. And if it weren't for that, a lot of the continent, a lot of people would starve. A lot of the markets would go down. So we have a lot to think about. It's very important that we acknowledge this and that we, really start to think about the ways that women in our society have been oppressed or have been kept down, kept back in one way or another. And it looks like the Zoom is about to cut us off shortly.
Yeah, I'll be able to type back in because I have a very early morning tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to bid you all good night, and I hope the conversation continues, and it is definitely helpful to all those who tune in.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for joining us, Sister Madonna.
I will again.
Yes, it was so great to have you. Hopefully you'll join us in the next discussions that we have. I think you were saying something, Brother Torrance?
I will.
Yes, good night. Yes, good avenue.
All right, so we're going to rejoin as soon as it cuts us off. For those who are watching on the live stream, we will be back in just a moment. We are just going to reactivate the Zoom so that we can continue the conversation. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, drop them in the comments section. If you're watching on Facebook, drop them or send them by direct message. We do monitor our DMs, and we will certainly do our best to address those questions as they come up. If you would like to join us here on this discussion, please visit the event page that we have on Facebook, and the details are posted there. All right, so we are just coming back into our
recording in progress.
We're just coming back into our discussion here. All right, we have Brother Corey. He just rejoined us. Okay, so we're still waiting on a few others here. Okay. Okay, we have Sister Portia. Sister Portia's rejoining us. We're still waiting on the others. And while we're waiting on the others to rejoin, I must say it's very interesting, some of the thoughts that have been shared so far. I love it. I love that we're actually having this conversation, because I've had so many spaces I've been in where women's voices especially tend to be marginalized, and I think we need to work on that. We need to do something to change this. Another thing is that some of the ideas that we have, they were already thought through, in times past. All it takes is really for us to revisit those ideas and to implement them. I love what Sister Isabella was saying in regards to the action, right? It's really something that speaks to me. I try to be involved as much as I can in some of the activities that other people are involved with as well. I try to support others. If I'm not able to do something, maybe I don't have the finances, maybe I don't have the time. I know that there are other people that are doing something. All it takes is for me to support them, And just to provide an example of that, this shirt I'm wearing here, this shirt, it says, I don't know if you can see this, but it says I like my history black, hold the sugar. This is a very brilliant design by Brother Joseph McGill of the Slave Dwelling Project. What he does with his organization is he travels around the country here in the United States. He visits some of the places where our ancestors who were enslaved were forced to live. And he has conversations there with people from, all over the place. People of various backgrounds, people who have different experiences. Some of them are not even, pro-black. A lot of them are people who are, some of them are racist. I'm just going to say that, but having that dialogue, I think it's something that is very important. Dialogue about race issues, about, the issues that we deal with on a regular basis, about history, right? About redefining some of the sort of concepts that have been developed, sort of like what we do here, except it's just kind of out there and more, more engaging, more immersion in there, and just really making a difference. I think that's what we need to be about. And for those who are watching, if you're thinking about an organization you can support, especially when it's led by a Black woman, I would also recommend Sister Biannul's charity in Haiti. She does some great work with that. She does some community work. She does work helping children, helping with disaster relief efforts. And we know the situation of Haiti right now, it's very critical. So, if you're thinking about action, what can I do to really act on these ideas that I have? I want to make a difference. I want to do something substantial. Those are just some ideas. All right, so we're still waiting on the others to join in, but in the meantime, did we have some additional points? Anyone have any additional points to follow up with what was shared previously?
I just wanted somebody, I can't remember if it was Portia or Madonna, was talking about the old traditional patriarchal, Western patriarchal idea of women expected to be basically basically be in the kitchen. Mm-hmm. And I remember raising that years ago in a conference in our university, and I was making the point that many of the people who put that argument, whether they're for it or even those who are against it, look at it from a very Western Eurocentric perspective. Because for people who are African-centered would understand that of course, it's understood that I'm speaking very broadly here. We have no choice but to speak broadly in some of these cases here. But generally speaking, in an African-centered perspective, the idea of a woman's place being in the home and being in the kitchen was not at all something demeaning. Because as was pointed out a little while ago, in many African cultures, and I also refer to people aside from Ifeoma Diome and Professor Oyewumi, also Elma Akob. Now, Professor Amadiume and Professor Oyewumi are from Nigeria. Akob is from the Cameroon, and I'll also point out a couple other African thinkers from different parts of the continent who more or less say the same thing, that in their ancestral cultures, the home was the seat of women's political power, because it was understood that they were the major producers of food, and being food producers, being the ones who control the gardens, and some of these gardens were extensive. As somebody explained to me, we've seen some of these back gardens women had in places like Senegal and Mali, northern part of Nigeria. You have there are gardens at the size of a small village. That's just the garden for one household. And these were gardens that were passed down from mother to daughter. And many political movements in Africa came out of that, to the point where you had, like, for example, in the Ile Ekwe, the titled women's groups of the Igbo, who had their power and influence was such that even after the councils of elders made political decisions, they are the ones who had the veto power. The same thing happens in the Cameroon. So, and all of this is traceable back to the home, the garden, and the market, which was controlled, particularly in West Africa, which was controlled by women. Most people in the West, when they understand the garden, when they understand the home, when they understand things like the market, they look at it from the what I call the Athenian perspective. Because in ancient Athens, the marketplace was where men gathered and had discussions, and women, particularly women who were the wives of the citizen, because a woman wasn't considered a citizen, or a slave, slave women were allowed into the market, if I remember correctly, because they basically had a work to do. But the women of the wives of the citizens, they were more or less forbidden to enter in Athens. It may have been different in Sparta, but like I said, generally speaking, a lot of our understanding of women's roles and gender roles, and the idea that the African woman is necessarily an oppressed person, is unfortunately filtered through this Western-centric lens, not understanding that the commercial trading system that existed in Central and West Africa for thousands of years were built around primarily women. Mm-hmm. And I have many academic papers that much of this still exists, particularly in West Africa. Mm. So I think we need to, and some of that, much of that transferred from Africa to the Caribbean in many respects, from enslavement down through post-emancipation, pretty much right up until relatively recent times. In fact, if you look at most markets now, at least in Trinidad, generally speaking, you're seeing a fairly even mix of men and women in the marketplace, particularly at peasant level. Most of they are women. Mm-hmm. And I think we are discounting that. Even in my own university, Portia could answer that better, I guess. that I'm not sure that we are looking at the political power of working class people, particularly working class women, in this context.
I will respond to that, Brother Corey. You know my position. you know my position. When I first started reading this book by Nini Salami called "A Black Feminist Approach for Everyone," I was skeptical, but after reading this book, you know what? I was even more skeptical because we have this idea, as you were explaining, Brother Corey, that in African history, in African culture, we didn't have a lot of the issues that we have today, which is true. But
I never necessarily said that.
Oh well, okay. Let me rephrase. I won't say this is what you're saying, Brother Corey. But I will say I've read in some places there seems to be, I would say, a sort of a disconnect in terms of the scholarship on sort of gender dynamics within pre-colonial African societies. There are some, for example, when I was reading Walter Rodney's "How Europe Underdeveloped Africa," I have that book behind me in my shelf. He is of the opinion or the ideology that colonialism interrupted a host of the I would say the mores, the cultural values that were inherent within African culture, right? And I agree with that. But if you read in his book, I love how whether Walter Rodney, he's not a person that's a one-track mind. He doesn't just kind of pick a side or the other, but I like that he does provide for nuances within his statements, within his arguments. He is very specific to say that this is what the evidence shows us, right? In his book, when he talks about the gender dynamics within pre-colonial Africa, he makes it very clear that within pre-colonial African societies, there were certain contexts in which women's rights, from our modern perspective, were not on the same level as men, right? Or there were certain contexts in which men had more power. I think that's more precise to what his statement was saying. So he talks about, for example, and I'm just talking about Walter Rodney's arguments, right? He talks about, for example, the household, right? The way that men were more in the decision-making process, and he talks about the polygamous relationships within Africa, which are explored in other literature, I think in more depth. But according to Walter Rodney, he felt that there was an unequal distribution of power in these relationships. There's some other literature I've read. I would say this book here, African Woman and Feminism, speaks more to your argument, Brother Corey. But there's a number of other books. I'm trying to see if I have them here. Here we go. Yeah, so this book in particular, I would highly recommend this book. It's called Mother Earth, Mother Africa, and African Indigenous Religions. Now, in this book, it gets very specific, very much in detail, I think like no other book before, on the gender dynamics in African societies and how colonialism has played a role in those dynamics, but also the dynamics that existed before colonialism, and how those dynamics continue today. But I will say that is really the subject of our next discussion for next weekend. The question for that discussion is, let me just read it here. The subject for our next discussion is, here we go. It is, what was the pre-colonial African approach to gender roles? That's where we're going to get really deep into that conversation, Brother Corey. So you kind of jumped the gun a little bit, but I'm excited. I'm fired up, Brother Corey, because I'm ready for it.
Yeah, no problem. Sorry for jumping the gun.
No, it's all right. Because that's actually where I want to go. But I do want to allow the opportunity for the introduction of this topic more broadly, because I want us to have a chance to explore all the different avenues, all the different questions. We want to be able to address as much as we can, within this month, since we're so focused on this topic, which is feminism and womanism. For those who are just watching, just tuning in, this is our third biannual research rumble. We're talking about feminism and womanism. We're joined here by 3 guests currently. We had a few others earlier, but they did hop off. We have here now with us Brother Corey, we have Sister Portia, we have Brother Terrence, all from Trinidad, that lovely island in the Caribbean Sea. We are so grateful to have all of you here joining us. For those watching live on Facebook, feel free to drop some questions in the chat. Feel free to, leave some comments. What are your ideas? What do you feel, we have not addressed here, that does need further exploration? Have you any questions on what's been discussed so far? Do you have any books or authors that you would like to suggest that I can add to my reading list? Because I tell you what, I like to read, I like to research, but I don't know everything. I'm still learning. So, feel free to even join the conversation here with us. So, Sister Portia or Brother Terrence, did you want to add to what Brother Corey was saying there?
Yeah, this Terrence, right? I was just wondering, womanism or feminism in Africa, I still ain't get the correct balance between what are the two terms. But how does matriarchy fit in to this discussion?
That is an interesting question.
Remember, we're saying that certain modes of production, the woman, in certain societies in Africa, the woman have the power in the marketplace and maybe in the politics and so on. And even in lending an air in some of the other societies. But what is the role of the matriarchy? Because I feel there's some connection in there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I don't know. I don't know if Omri and I had this discussion earlier, and I think it was before everyone logged in. We had this conversation just before we began, and I was telling him that I don't even like to use the term matriarchy, because many people tend to, I'm not saying this applies to you, I mean, we more or less read the same books and so on, but right. Most people tend to confuse matriarchy as a female version of the patriarch.
Of the patriarchy.
Yeah, a lot of people fall into that. Far too many people, including people who I thought would have known better,
That is why I'm attending modes of production.
Right. I believe I am the one who coined the term. I could be dead wrong, you know. I use the term matriarchal. I love to. I tend to see things in that light, because there is even in pre-colonial Africa, even along the Nile Valley and so on, there was a very uneasy tension.
Yes.
Generally speaking, between those two ideologies or customs and so on. It wasn't all rosy, as Omri is alluding to, and correctly so. There was always a somewhat uneasy tension. Mm-hmm. But you would find that what we would call patriarchy, because even among many patriarchal African cultures, for example, like the Zulus, you found that women were not without power, not without considerable influence. But to understand that, we may have to divorce ourselves from Western ideas of what power is. And you will find that many of these cultures, and I'll go even further, even though we are discussing African, even though we're discussing Africa here and African-centered cultures, I will go even further to include pre-capitalist Europe. And one of the reasons why I am doing that is because of the fact that there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Africans living in Europe long before the 15th century. So you're going to get, there are very interesting similarities where, particularly among peasant cultures, the seat of power and influence, there was a bottom-up democratic tradition that the linchpin of it, the hinge of it, was the women. And you can connect a lot of this back to Africa itself. So you find that again and again it revolves around food production. So that to understand matriarchy or the matriarchal cultures and so on, matrifocal cultures, whatever you want to call it, we need to understand that even that there was a certain amount of deference paid to women and femininity. Let me go even further. Let me say femininity, because it gets into some very murky waters here when we talk about as opposed to man and woman. Because when you read, for example, Professor Oyewumi's book, or there's another scholar, Nkero Nzegu. She's also Nigerian. She's also Yoruba, if I'm not correct. Yes, she's also Yoruba. They talk about the fact that Anne Amadiome, with her book Male Daughters, Female Husbands, there are people who are anatomically male, mm-hmm. but may be considered a wife in a particular household, or a woman who is somebody who is anatomically female would be considered a husband in a particular household. So we got to be very careful about it. But that's a topic for a whole other discussion. Maybe that might be for next week as well.
Yes.
But to come back, the question of matriarchal cultures, that would vary, of course, according to the culture in question. But generally speaking, like I said, whether you're looking at Nigeria, whether you're looking at Mali, whether you're looking at the Cameroon, you would find even allowing for the fact that there's a very uneasy tension, that there was a lot of deference towards women that you don't find in capitalist Europe. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the early travel writings of Europeans as they were moving into Africa and colonizing it, you'd realize that one of the first things that they began to do was to put laws in place that moved inheritance from women to men. Mm-hmm. So we need to look at that in my opinion. I don't know if that addresses your question.
Yeah, but Terrence, did that help?
Yeah. especially that last point. There's so much in that. But as the whole colonial discussion, moving things like inheritance to men and all this kind of stuff. But are you going to deal with anything matrifocal, to put it that way?
What do you mean?
You're going to have another session or two, right?
Yes, that's right. So just briefly, let me explain, Brother Terrence. Next, we're actually starting to ask specific questions. So yeah, so for the next one, next Sunday, the question is, what was the pre-colonial African approach to gender roles? The following Sunday, can patriarchal systems be transformed? And the Sunday after that, the question is going to be, what does intersectionality look like? So next week is when we're really going to start to address those questions of matriarchy, patriarchy, patrilineality, and matrilineality, right? Which are very important in order for us to understand the African systems. And I use the word systems plural, mindful of the fact that there wasn't just one system in Africa, right? You had, systems in which the women were central, right? And you had systems in which the men were central, right? And I do want to be careful, like Brother Corey was saying as well, the term matriarchy is not in the same sense as the word patriarchy that we think in the Western conception. It's not about dominance. It's not about control. But it's that's not the idea, right? There's a scholar, Oba Tashaka. He has a book on the concept of the matriarchy in Africa, and he uses the word twin lineal instead of saying matrilineal or patrilineal. His idea is that, there was a sharing of roles between the male and the female, the mother and the father. So it's certain different ways that we can think about this, but I think it is important, though, that we address it, like you said, Brother Terrence, and that we will, I can assure you.
Okay, great.
Brother Corey, to address the point that you made, this is from the volume by Oyeronki Oyewumi, African Woman and Feminism. I'm going to go more detail on this next week, but I just wanted to kind of bring this up since you did allude to it, Brother Corey. I want to quote here something she says in reference to Dahomey in society. So she's talking here about the research by Ife Adiomi in regards to the male daughter, female husband concept. Okay? So what she says, quote, the role of wife, quote, wife, encapsulates the relationship of women who enter a particular lineage through marriage, in contrast to their husbands, defined as men, women, and children, in parentheses, both boys and girls, who are members of the lineage by birth. The definition of marriage, the definition of marriage does not depend on there being a sexual relationship between two people. Rather, it is often a social, non-sexual relationship, indicating the place of an individual in the family. Thus, in yet another configuration, a woman marries a woman in order for the female husband, quote, quote, to be able to have children that she can claim customarily as heirs. The female wife, quote unquote, is a wife to the female husband in that she, in parentheses, the husband has dual rights to her and the children produced within the marriage, despite the fact that they do not engage in sexual intercourse. A male recruited by the husband, well, I'm not going to go too deep there because this is talking about the sexual, dynamics in those relationships, right? But that's just to give an idea of the concept that you were discussing there. I just wanted to elaborate on it. You know, for those who are listening or watching, to get an idea of what Brother Corey was relating to there. In the book here by Nina Salami, she does talk also about the concept of matriarchy, but I love her blog site because she really goes into more depth, I feel. She actually referenced the research by Ife Adiomi on the concept of male daughters and female husbands, and explains that this is confused a lot of times, but she explains, similar to what I just read there, this is in the introduction to the book African Woman and Feminism, the introduction that was written by the editor Oyeronke Oyewumi. She does explain how these are very particular roles that are being discussed, and not so much the idea of a biological function or the sort of idea we think about today in terms of a person feeling that they are female or a person feeling that they are male, but it was really a social framework which allowed women in certain West African societies to literally continue their own lineage instead of having to tie themselves to a man and to join their lineage. So, for example, a woman could say, well, I can't bear any children for this man. Okay? What I'm going to do is I'm going to adopt another woman as my husband, and this woman will bear my children for me. So when those children come to be, those are my children. Okay? That's what the concept is all about. But we're gonna go more into that next week. I just wanted to kind of go into the sort of general ideas about feminism and womanism. But I love that you brought that up, Brother Corey, because it allows for us to prepare for that conversation, to really go into the research and to get some more understanding on the pre-colonial ways that African people related to each other as men and women.
Yeah, I need to get a copy of that book. I imagine it would be very informative because I have her book here right in front of me, The Invention of Women. Mm-hmm. And trust me, it's a very, very, very illuminating read.
Yes. I have to get that one. It's referenced very heavily in some of these books, but I'm going to definitely get my hands on that as well. But I'm curious to know, are there any other questions that we can add as we continue this month into these different avenues of this topic? Any other questions that come to mind, Brother Corey, Sister Portia, Brother Terrence? Maybe you just maybe wanted a better understanding about, and we can talk about it. We can do some research, and then we can come together, bring our ideas together, and we can talk about it.
Remember, I did ask you earlier on that if you could expand on Chimamanda Adichie's "We should all be feminists," because of the fact that term is so very contentious, and because that feminism, mainstream feminism, let's call it mainstream feminism, which is essentially the middle class, white Anglo-Saxon, not necessarily Protestant, but white and middle class, has a deeply racist past and present. Right. So I'd like to know on that because I've not read her book.
Okay. Yeah. I would definitely refer to the TED Talk. I'm looking at her book right now, and it's basically the TED Talk, I believe, was based on the book. So I'm going to just read this quote here. This is interesting to me because she doesn't just adopt the term feminism kind of recklessly. I think she really took some time to think about it. She says, so here we go. She says, an academic, a Nigerian woman, told me that feminism was not our culture, that feminism was un-African, and I was only calling myself a feminist because I had been influenced by Western books, which amused me because much of my early reading was decidedly unfeminist. Each time I tried to read those books called classical feminist texts, I got bored and I struggled to finish them. Anyway, since feminism was un-African, I decided I would now call myself a happy African feminist. Then a dear friend told me that calling myself a feminist meant that I hated men. So I decided I would now be a happy African feminist who does not hate men. At some point, I was a happy African feminist who does not hate men and who likes to wear lip gloss and high heels for herself and not for men. Of course, much of this was tongue-in-cheek, but what it shows is how that word feminist is so heavy with baggage, negative baggage. You hate men, you hate bras, you hate African culture, you think women should always be in charge, you don't wear makeup, you don't shave, you're always angry, and don't have a sense of humor, you don't use deodorant. So that's just a quote from Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's book, We Should All Be Feminists.
Which hold that thought. That is almost identical to what Elma Acob is saying. If you listen to her TED talk, it's almost identical to what the exact same thing.
Yeah, I heard her talk, but of course her perspective is we don't need African. What she's saying is that feminism is not for us. Elma Acob says that basically womanism is a concept that we need to explore more, because feminism, she believes, is something that came about through the experiences of Western women, especially white women, and their struggles against patriarchy in their society, right? So I realize the more I read about these two different ideas, is the more I can see the ways that they overlap, but I can see the differences as well. So,
that's why I'm very curious to hear Adichie's take on this. Very, very curious.
Oh yeah, I wish she could have
because
this here.
Because there's also Professor Quinora Hudson Weems.
Oh yeah. Yes. Africana womanism.
Right. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So where do we fit in her arguments in relation to what Adichie is saying?
That's the question. Some feel that the womanism idea was dated and not relevant today. Some feel feminism is just so popular that is the way to go. So it's definitely something we got to think about. We're about to get cut off by Zoom in just a second, and we're going to join right back on.
Right.
Yeah, those watching, stay tuned. We'll be back shortly.
Recording in progress.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our third biannual Research Rumble. We are here discussing the topic Feminism and Womanism. We have a few guests here with us. I'm just going to wait here as they rejoin us. All right, so we have Brother Corey back with us. We're still waiting on our other guest. Okay, I see Brother Terrence. Welcome back, Brother Terrence. Okay, so we're still waiting. I don't know if Sister Portia is going to be joining us because she did say she had to step away for a little bit. Oh, okay, here she goes. All right, Sister Portia is back. Sister Portia is in the building. So good to have Sister Portia back with us. Hello, hello.
Hi. Yes, I'm back.
I find you too quiet.
You find it too quiet? Well, nothing wrong with listening sometimes, Corey. You know that.
True.
And then, well, I said just now I had to step away because someone came to see me, so I had to step away just now.
Right, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But I was listening, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yes, so we were discussing, where were we, Brother Corey? We were discussing Sister Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's We Should All Be Feminists. We were talking about what she had to say about the idea of what feminism means, which was a key question that we had asked earlier on in this discussion. Now, the question is, what is womanism? Based on my readings, based on my research, my understanding of womanism, as opposed to feminism, is that womanism is about women identifying their roles in society and really expressing themselves, their agency through those roles. I would even argue redefining those roles too. I feel like that's a potential goal of radical womanism. Feminism, I would say that Sister Mina Salami has done an excellent job on exploring the history of feminism. She talks about all the different waves of feminism, but she pays attention particularly to African feminism, which is very particular. She talks about the ways that African feminism has evolved. She talks about the different concepts, and she even addresses womanism. Now, feminism, from what I gather, is more about women equalizing themselves in society, with the knowledge that there's inequality in society, gender inequality. Within the Western society, the emphasis is more so on the way that women are paid for their work. In times past, it was about women having the right to vote. Women having equal status in the social, the financial, even the cultural aspects of society. Whereas in Africa, in African societies, the emphasis is different. And this is a concept that's addressed in this book. Sister Oyewumi talks about this. The fact that African women, they have different challenges than women of the West. And even compared to African American women, African people of the diaspora, they have a different struggle that she believes should not be confused. So we got to be mindful of that. The struggles of African women tend to be more along the lines of the colonial legacy. The fact that the governments of Africa tend to be, tend to be less respectful of women in those societies. There is the issue of women not having the not having representation in areas of society that are more towards leadership. You talk about the private sector, right? Women tend to occupy more of the jobs that are less valued, whereas men tend to occupy the executive positions in Africa. So you look at the governments as well. There were a number of African governments in which women served as the head of state. I believe the first African government of such was Liberia. So, things are changing, but there's a long way to go for women's equality in Africa. Another concept that we're going to address next week is the subject of what Nina Salami calls proto-feminism. So she has this idea that feminism is not just a modern concept, that in pre-colonial African societies, women had struggles against patriarchy, and as a result of those struggles, were able to occupy certain positions of political leadership. There's a book here. I love this book. This book is called Female Monarchs and Merchant Queens in Africa by Nwando Achibi. She talks about women's Queen and Zinga. She talks about
What is that? What name again?
So this book. I'm sorry, this book here. It's called Female Monarchs and Merchant Queens in Africa. This is one of my favorite books. The author is Nwando Achibi, who is actually the daughter of the famous, legendary Nigerian author by the same last name. Yeah, Brother Achibi. So, Chinua Achebe, yeah. So, in this book, this author talks about some of the historic African queens, the women who were really powerful that we remember today. Like Queen Hatshepsut, right? Queen Nefertiti. There's so many of them. Unfortunately, though, this is another thing that we have to understand, is that a lot of the historical narratives were not written by women. Even African narratives, a lot of them were written by the men. There were African griots who were women, something that I've learned recently. But I feel like it's important for us to take that into consideration. It's important for us to acknowledge the fact that the stories that we learn about, they come with certain perspectives. They're shaped by certain dynamics of those very cultures that we're studying. So it's just something to think about. It's something to think about. That's what I take from this conversation, or this research rather, when I think about the differences between feminism and womanism. What is feminism? I use the term agency. And what is womanism? I use the term duty. While that's very simplistic, I think that if someone were to ask that question, what is the difference? To me, that's a quick answer. That's sort of one of those ways to really, to give a response that I think summarizes, in a nutshell, kind of a general overview of what those concepts are about. Any thoughts on that?
I have to step away for a second. Say that again.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I was asking. Did you have any thoughts on that, Brother Corey? Feminism. What is feminism and what is womanism? Do you feel like that analysis that I gave there helps to explain somewhat or have you come up with some other understandings from your research? Maybe you missed the last part of what I said, Brother Corey, but I was saying, okay, I was saying that feminism, the word that comes to mind for me when I hear the word feminism is agency, which is, is the ability, the potential, the power, how women are able to really define themselves, right, and to really gain an equal standing in society. Some people refer to radical feminism as women trying to take all the power. I wouldn't really go that far, but and then there's the womanist side, right? When I hear womanism, the idea that comes to my mind is duty. It's about roles. It's about women trying to identify the ways that they're able to shape society, and to really negotiate or to help men to understand how they can work together in order to achieve a better world.
And there's considerable overlap on both sides.
Oh yeah,
has always been. I think one of the problems really we may be, and I recall Dr. Oyewumi warning about this. I read in her book when one of the talks she gave of us getting bogged down too much into definitions. And we might need to remember that and take that into consideration. The fact that a lot of what we're talking about there, aspects of both could be found in any given Caribbean society, going back to post-emancipation. By women who just simply did what needed to be done, and to some extent had their agency as well. And yes, there were tensions. There were many, many tensions. Sometimes a simple case of marriage. Women in Haiti, in Haiti, women in Trinidad. I've come across a lot of stuff where, particularly among working class women and men, and we had this conversation I think last year, you and I, where the women struggled hard not to be married, but to stay in common law relationships, for the simple reason that marriage was understood in the Western sense, and particularly in the Western legal sense, that was taking shape in the Caribbean. And as such, they understood that being formally married would put there would be a considerable loss of agency.
Wow.
I've come across that over and over and over. I kept coming across this information just keep coming up to the surface, and there was a lot of tension, there was a lot of conflicts, particularly among the middle class, the white expatriates and so on. In some cases, the white women were the chief culprits. I remember there's a particular episode that I recall coming across in a book by a woman who was a little girl in the late 19th century. She passed away in 1971, I think. The name of the book is Child of the Tropics, by Isolde Bridges. I think it was her son who more or less wrote the book based on her testimony and so. And where the wife of an estate owner got into a furious argument with her husband because she found out that one of his key foremen was in a common law relationship with a woman for years, that she was under the impression that they were married, and she refused to have them employed unless they were married. And the woman was pregnant with yet another child, And she came up to the woman and begged her, please don't go through with this. The man treated me good. We've been good all these years. Don't do this. And she wanted, it's like, hey, you living in sin. And they got married. They eventually got married. And the marriage, I don't think, lasted 10 months. The whole thing fell apart. For the exact same fears that the woman was expressing. Because it was understood that once that is legally sanctioned, then he expected to have certain powers that he intended to exercise. And you see that coming across in many, many other aspects.
Yeah.
Funny thing is that by the 1950s, when in the 1960s, and we were getting independence, we began to see a reversal of that now, and you began to see what today we would call respectability politics. And it's something I want to look into further in the next couple of months when I resume research on that book as to why that switch took place. And because I have a belief it had to do with the elevation of a political educated elite that the British and the French were grooming, aided by the United States, by the way, to take over these colonies that would be colonizing, because the majority of the political leaders at the time were from the labor movement, and they needed to sever that tie, that connection between labor and party politics and parliamentary politics. They needed to sever it because it was too radical. So they were grooming this middle class elite, of which people like Eric Williams, C.L.R. James, and so on came to. Bustamante, Norman Manley, and so on. Basically, to all of Buster, I think was more the labor side, but again, move into this professional political class, and you begin to see the rise of this respectability middle class patriarchy that we still struggling with to this very day in the Caribbean.
It's interesting what I'm hearing there, because today I've been reading this book. This one doesn't have a cover. This is a library book. But I guess someone took the cover and ran with it. But you can see on the spine the name of the book there, and it's on the inside too. The book is called "The Myth of the Missing Black Father." It's a volume edited by Roberta L. Coles and Charles Green. This book is specific to the United States. And what I read in this book, Brother Corey, is the exact opposite of what you're saying there in regards to the Caribbean. In the Caribbean, what you're saying there is that the concept of marriage in the colonial and neo-colonial sense was divesting women of their power. So it was really seen by women as, surrendering to male privileges, surrendering to the patriarchal, I'm trying to find the words, the patriarchal standard, right? Whereas in the United States, and maybe this could be the same thing, actually, now I'm thinking about it. But in the United States, particularly around the end of the 20th century, it was this sort of government intervention within relationships, particularly a particular effect in the Black community, where they would say, if the woman who is a mother decides to live in a household by themselves without a male in that household, then they were able to gain access to certain benefits. So for them, it would be as if marriage would be a divestment of power, right? It would basically disqualify them from those kind of benefits. So actually, yeah, I can see that there's a sort of overlap in both of those contexts.
You find it was here too in the Caribbean. It was here too as well. You know, I'm not saying absolute. We're talking in absolutes here. What you just described.
Mm-hmm.
You also find that here in the Caribbean, from the 19th century into the 20th century, you found that as well.
Yeah.
There was a very interesting seesaw tension that existed. Right.
So this is what I'm saying. So but in that particular, so you're saying that basically they had the same thing going on in the Caribbean at one time.
I'm saying that partly because these bloody the neighbors' dogs in the background there.
Yeah. It's all right.
But because of you also have to understand another one of the things we have to understand. We need to take into consideration is that in the Caribbean, in slave societies, you had the numerical. There was a profound numerical imbalance, which I don't think you found in the United States. African people were in the numerical majority in the Caribbean.
Right.
Then post-emancipation, coming down to the end of the 19th century,
mm-hmm.
you find that in some African countries, some Caribbean countries, there was a period in which there was an influx of free African indentured migrants who came to this. So these were free Africans who came to the Caribbean. So they came with their cultures intact and interface with the descendants of enslaved Africans. Mm-hmm. So we need to factor that in. And so, having said that, what the hell was I going to say now?
You were talking about how I was talking about in the United States, the government would try to break up the that unity between the woman and the man. But you're saying there was a similar thing going on in the Caribbean.
There's a similar thing going on, but at the same time, you found that because of the extent to which the level of European socialization in the Caribbean mm-hmm. was more subtle. It was done through the education system. It was done through the church. In fact, the education system was run by the church, was run by missionaries. Mm-hmm. Particularly in the English-speaking Caribbean, much of the education or schooling rather was done by missionaries. Mm-hmm. Some of these missionaries came from the U.S. and some from Canada, right. But a lot of them did.
The early educational system.
Pardon?
You're saying the early educational system.
Yeah, early to middle education. Matter of fact, I right on my desk. There is a book written by someone who you met, who I introduced you to, Kasala Kamara, who recently wrote a very interesting, very illuminating book on the life of the founder of the school he and I attended, at St. Benedict's College, on the life of this was a monk, Professor Basil Matthews, or everybody knows him as Dom Basil. At the time, he was a Dom in the Catholic Church. Now, he was a black man, very interesting figure. In spite of his Catholicism, was also very African centered. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the reasons why he was essentially erased from the intellectual legacy in Trinidad and Tobago. There's a lot of people who don't know about the Dom at all because of the fact that he was a multidisciplinary scholar who was also black at a time that you had no right being that, particularly in the Catholic Church. And he founded a school and that essentially revolutionized education in Trinidad and Tobago. So, but it just goes to show that here you have yet another example of education institution that was founded by a religious body. Okay. So you have that, and yet in spite of that, you find it coming up against a very strong African-centered set of customs, which included the understood autonomy of women and femininity in the, that came across the Atlantic.
Right.
So and a lot of that had to do, and it was understood in that context that marriage in the Western sense was a challenge to that.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, we also have to factor in that from the 19th century, hell, from the 18th century, because there's a book that I've downloaded but I've yet to read that was what was written in the late 1700s, but was extremely popular even in the 19th century because it was reading a woman who was writing in 1831. That is why I knew about the book in the first place. She had mentioned it by one, I think her name was by Sarah Tribble, I think was her name.
Okay.
Is the book. And this book was that Tribble had written was actually a series of books that she had written were handbooks as to how to properly comport yourself if you were a woman growing up in a Western, particularly English society. And it was a popular reading manual, so to speak, even up into the 19th century.
Wow.
So you had that respectability politics being drummed into the African and Indian population from very early on post-emancipation, even before emancipation.
That is interesting. So essentially, it's like you just can't win. You know,
you just can't win.
Because on one side, it's like, okay, you get married, and you got to give up all of the, these. You got to give up this freedom, and then on the other hand, it's like you don't get married. You don't get married, and you still have to give up something, right? You still have to give up the stability of having an environment, where you got the balance. So,
sorry to interrupt. Mind you, in the information that I've come across, like I said, I need to do more research on this. It's just I'm trying to finish the book that I'm writing, which has to do with something else. But the research that I've come across, that the men also resisted this. A lot of men didn't like it either. So it's not just the women; it's also the men who didn't like the idea.
Yeah, it's going to affect them somehow because who do you think comes out of those homes, right? The children is also going to be men. Eventually, they're going to become men. The boys are going to grow up to become men. So it's not just the woman that's going to be affected. The boys as men are going to have to deal with the repercussions of what their mothers are facing, right?
Yeah, essentially.
Yeah, it makes
and there's a whole and there are so many interesting nuances in this. And I kept coming across, and I'm like, I was constantly bookmarking stuff because I'm like, what the hell? No one told me this in social studies class. It's like, wow. I came across a published 4-volume diary of a French Catholic priest who refused to speak English, by the way. That's a whole different topic. The entire time he spent in Trinidad, he refused to speak English. But his diaries were translated into a 4-volume book. He was a parish priest in the late 19th century in Trinidad. And it gives you a really illuminating snapshot into the social life in rural Trinidad.
Yeah.
And these various tensions between the genders and so on, and the ways in which men and women rejected the social and gender roles that were laid out for them by Eurocentrism.
What was the name of that book again, Brother Corey?
The Diaries of Armand Marcy. Just a hold. Let me look for it. Let me pull it up.
Yeah, because that's very.
Yeah,
that's a good resource.
Yeah, Diaries of Abbe Armand Marcy. Yeah, that's the name. I now remember it. I remember it now.
Okay.
Diary of Abe, ABBE, Amon Masse, M-A-S-S-E.
Mm-hmm.
Translated by some French Creole descendants here in Trinidad, namely Devatiles. He was one of the Devatiles who was a historian in his own right.
Okay. That's an excellent resource, Brother Corey. I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm going to add that to our list because what we have a little Google Doc where we're compiling a list of references, some materials that our viewers and even our participants who want to learn more about, again, that kind of history, like about the ways that gender was structured in throughout history, from the pre-colonial African time until in this present day. That's something that we got to explore in order to understand how things have changed and what we need to do going forward. All right, so I see Brother Terrence was.
Yeah, he seems like doing.
Yeah, but we're gonna just wrap up. I'm glad that you were able to join us, Brother Terrence. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I have to sign off now. So
okay.
All the best.
All the best. All the best, Conrad.
Terrence. Okay. Thanks again.
Yeah, you too. Okay, Corey.
Okay. Yeah, so we're gonna wrap up. But I do want to just say a special thanks to everyone that was able to join in this discussion. To those that were here earlier, we had Sister Isabella, we had Sister Madonna. I tried to remember all the names. Sister Denisa was here. And so hopefully we will see them again. Those who are watching us live here on Facebook, or if you're watching the restream on YouTube, I just want to again reiterate the points that have been made throughout this discussion. We heard a number of perspectives. We started off just talking about the idea of feminism and womanism. What does it mean? We talked about what is womanhood? What is a woman, or who is a woman? How do we define these identities, these concepts, and how has this changed over time? So we did touch briefly on the subject of gender roles, or an understanding of gender roles in pre-colonial Africa. That's going to be our main subject for next weekend. Next week, Sunday, we're meeting same time. I am definitely looking forward to that conversation. So for those of you who are watching, you want to participate, just send a message and we will be glad to have you. We will send you all the details. If you're looking for some great resources, we can also send you our link to our Google Doc where you can see all the books that we're studying. If you have some more you want to suggest, feel free to do so. We'll definitely add them in. So once again, we appreciate all those who have joined us for this discussion. Thank you so much. I want to again introduce myself. My name is Omri Cope, the host of Black Researchers United. I'm here trying to develop this platform so we can have these conversations, we can have more of this, we can have people who are able to collaborate on this research, because there's so much information out there. It's hard for any one person to put this together. But hey, we appreciate the progress that we've been able to make so far. We thank both of you, wonderful people, Brother Corey. We have also Sister Portia. Thank you so much for taking the time out to do this, to be here with us and to share your thoughts. It's been
very nice discussion.
Yeah, very, very.
Yes, thanks. It was nice. I mean, yes, because I was also, it's 10:40 here, so I have I have class. But once I know Corey is on, I know it will be interesting. And of course, the topic was illuminating and enlightening. And to me, as I said before, where womanism and even feminism is concerned, as I said, I only heard about womanism tonight. Feminism, I'm still learning more about its intricacies. And for me, feminism is empowering women, right? So that's how I see it. I have to do some research where womanism is concerned, because I'm still trying to figure out what it is to be a woman. To me, it's an evolving process. It's a learning process, an evolving process. Why I'm concerned, I can't speak for everyone else. But it was a pleasure to be on, and these discussions, they bring about talk and discourse, which is good. And with these talks and discourse, it can help and illuminate and enlighten. And that's very good. So thanks for having me. And it was a pleasure. And, for all this listening.
I'll send you some things so that I'll go out and push.
Right, no problem. Because some of the books I saw Omri displayed, it's like, oh, okay. And the thing is that, when it comes to feminism, especially Black feminism, it's so deep and varied. And, I wouldn't mind learning more about it because, feminism, most of the time you hear it from a white woman's perspective, the Western perspective. But then there's the Latin American perspective, there's the Caribbean perspective. And, you have, and all these different types of feminisms, be it even where Europe is concerned, you have people of color, women of color in these countries as well. What is feminism for them? So, it'd be nice that these things can come out from time to time. But, thanks for having me, and it was a pleasure.
Yes. Likewise, Sister Portia. It was my pleasure as well. This is something that, we have to do these things. We have to have these conversations. Because if not, then who will, We got to do it because it's very necessary in this day and age. So I'm excited. I'm excited to see where the next conversation takes us. I'm hoping that we're able to expand the discussion a little bit more, to have more, even a more diversity of voices too. I like that we have the representation from Trinidad. Like Corey was saying earlier, it would be great to have more African American women represented here. Women from the continent of Africa. Women from other parts of Latin America. Women from even Asia. We have African women all over the world, and it would be great to hear what they have to say. So, once again, thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for being a part of this. I just can't say enough thanks. And if I missed anyone, please forgive me. But we definitely are happy, and we hope that you all have a wonderful rest of your weekend. And we will speak again. Once again, this is the third biannual Research Rumble. I'm your host, Omri Koch of Black Researchers United. Remember always our motto: search and research. So, search on. Have a good evening, everyone.
Bye.
Record.